You ever think you're living the dream until someone comes along and tries to turn it into a nightmare? That was me. I owned every inch of a 50-acre estate just outside of town, and for the longest time, it felt like nothing could touch me out there. The land had been in my family for generations. My great-grandfather bought it in the 1920s, when it was nothing but rolling hills and untouched forest. He built the house by hand, piece by piece, and every generation since has added something of their own. The stables, the guest house, the trails through the woods. Each corner of the estate tells a story. It's more than just land to me. It's legacy. It's peace. It's mine. Most days I'd wake up, grab a coffee, and do a walk around the property. Sometimes I'd check the fence lines or the creek that runs along the eastern edge. Sometimes I'd just stand in the middle of one of the meadows, taking in the silence. The kind of silence that only exists miles away from traffic, sirens, and nosy neighbors. That solitude is sacred. Or at least it was. Because about 5 years ago, that peace got disrupted in the worst way. A new housing development cropped up just north of my land, Pinewood Estates. I remember seeing the signs go up, the construction equipment rumbling to life. I wasn't thrilled, but I wasn't overly concerned either. I figured, let them have their tightly packed houses and picture-perfect lawns. As long as they stayed on their side of the property line, we'd be fine. I had no interest in bothering them, and I certainly didn't think they'd bother me. I should have known better. What I didn't realize then was that this shiny new suburb came with something far worse than traffic or noise. It came with a homeowners association. And the self-appointed queen of that kingdom? A woman named Karen. The first time I met her, it was early October, leaves just starting to change, the kind of crisp air that makes you glad to be alive. I was walking the southern trail, checking a section of the fence that a storm had knocked loose a few weeks back. I'd just bent down to inspect one of the posts when I heard it. That voice. "Excuse me, sir." You know how some voices just hit a frequency that's instantly irritating? That was this one. Sharp, demanding, like a teacher scolding you before you even know what you've done wrong. I stood up slowly, turned around, and saw her marching toward me like she was leading a parade. Short blonde bob, yoga pants, a tablet clutched to her chest like it was some holy relic. She was already frowning. I remember thinking, this ought to be good, but I kept my face neutral. "Can I help you?" I asked. She gave me a tight-lipped smile that didn't reach her eyes and introduced herself like I should already know her. Karen Johnson, president of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. She stuck out her hand, like it was some kind of official greeting. I shook it, more out of politeness than anything else, and replied with a simple, "Michael Reynolds?" Her tone changed immediately. "Mr. Reynolds, I'm so glad I caught you. We need to talk about several violations on your property that are affecting our community standards." Violations? On my property? I blinked, caught off guard. "Come again?" She didn't skip a beat, started tapping away on her tablet like she had a whole presentation queued up. "Your grass is far too long. Our regulations state that all lawns must be trimmed to under 3 inches. And those trees near the back fence haven't been pruned properly. Overgrowth like that attracts pests, you know. And..." I raised a hand, cutting her off. "Ma'am, I think there's been some sort of misunderstanding. This land isn't part of your development. I'm not under your HOA." She stared at me like I'd just told her gravity wasn't real. "Of course you are. I can see your house from my backyard. That's part of Pinewood Estates." I shook my head slowly. "No, it's not. This estate predates your subdivision by nearly a century. My property line is over a 1/4 mile from your fence." She wasn't having it. "Don't be ridiculous, Mr. Reynolds. Every home visible from within Pinewood Estates falls under the HOA's jurisdiction." At that point, I started to feel my patience slipping. This is private land. I have no agreement with your HOA. I didn't sign anything. I'm not bound by your rules. Karen's jaw tightened. She looked at me like I was actively challenging her throne. That may be what you think, but Pinewood Estates has clearly defined boundaries, and your house falls within them. We've already updated the community registry to include your lot. That's when it clicked. She wasn't just mistaken. She genuinely believed she had control over land that didn't belong to her, like claiming a piece of land just because you can see it from your bedroom window. It was delusional and dangerous. I took a slow breath. Look, I'm telling you plainly, this is private property. It's not part of your HOA. You have no jurisdiction here. I'm asking you to leave now, and we can both pretend this little misunderstanding never happened. For a moment, I thought she might back down. But then she crossed her arms, planted her feet and said, I will not leave until these violations are addressed. That was the moment I realized what I was really dealing with. Not just a nosy neighbor, not just a pushy suburbanite. No, I was dealing with a full-blown clipboard-wielding Karen on a power trip, and this was only the beginning. By the time Karen threatened to call the police, I was already done entertaining her fantasy of authority. I crossed my arms and told her, go ahead. I've got nothing to hide. I meant it. There wasn't a single inch of my property that wasn't in compliance with county codes. And more importantly, there wasn't a single reason why her HOA had any say over what I did on my land. She gave me this tight smile, the kind people wear when they think they've just won, and turned around to dial. She kept glancing back at me while she talked, pacing near my gate like she expected me to run or cave or grovel. I leaned against an old oak and watched her with the kind of calm that only comes from knowing you're 100% in the right. About 20 minutes later, a patrol car rolled up the gravel drive, familiar dust cloud trailing behind it. I recognized the officer immediately, David Parker, someone I'd known for years. He used to stop by during hunting season to check permits, sometimes just to shoot the breeze. He stepped out of the car, took one look at me, then looked over at Karen, who was already marching toward him with her tablet out like it was Exhibit A in the trial of the century. Officer, thank goodness, she started, all flustered and self-important. This man is refusing to comply with the Homeowners Association guidelines. He's letting his lawn become an eyesore. His trees are a hazard. And he's told me he doesn't have to follow our rules. She said it all like she was tattling on a kid caught skipping school. David raised an eyebrow, glanced my way and asked, You talking about Michael Reynolds? She nodded furiously. That's right. He claims he's not part of the Pinewood Estates HOA. David gave her a look that was half amusement, half disbelief. Ma'am, Michael's property isn't part of your development. He's not a member of your HOA. Never has been. Karen blinked. But you can see his house from my backyard. I stepped forward at that point, trying hard not to grin. That might be true, Karen. But there's a good quarter-mile between your fence and my porch. It's all mine. Every last tree and blade of grass. She sputtered, turning redder by the second. There must be some mistake. Surely there are local ordinances, property maintenance laws, something. David was trying not to laugh. No, ma'am. Mr. Reynolds's property is fully up to code. This estate's been around a lot longer than your subdivision. I'm going to have to ask you to leave. You're trespassing. That was the first time Karen was told no and couldn't wriggle out of it. Her jaw clenched, her eyes narrowed, and she hissed, This isn't over, before stomping off down the road like a child who didn't get their way. I thanked David for coming out, offered him a beer, which he turned down with a grin. He was on duty after all, but told me he'd be back another day. I watched him drive off, thinking maybe that was the end of it. Maybe Karen would finally accept reality. I couldn't have been more wrong. For the next week, things got oddly quiet. I went about my usual routines, mowing the lawn, fixing a broken shutter, walking the dog along the eastern trail, and didn't hear a peep from Karen or anyone from Pinewood Estates. I figured maybe the police visit embarrassed her enough to back off. But that kind of petty doesn't disappear. It just regroups. I started noticing little things. A note slipped into my mailbox, typed, unsigned, but unmistakably Karen's tone, saying, "Maintaining your property reflects your values. Be a good neighbor." I laughed and threw it in the recycling bin. Then came the slow-driving SUV. I'd be out front, stacking firewood, or just enjoying the sun, and there she'd be, creeping past my gate at 5 miles an hour, pretending to check her phone or fiddle with the radio. Only she wasn't listening to music. She was watching. Every time I looked up, she'd look away. Once, I saw her actually stop at the end of my driveway and lean out the window, phone in hand, snapping photos of my fence. That's when I decided it was time to put a stop to the passive-aggressive antics. I walked straight down the gravel path, boots crunching loud enough for her to hear, and called out, "Karen!" She jumped like I'd caught her stealing. "Oh, Mr. Reynolds," she said with a forced smile. "I was just admiring the view." I crossed my arms. "With your camera pointed at my barn?" She had the decency to look embarrassed, for about 2 seconds. "I was documenting ongoing issues. The HOA board is concerned about—" "Karen," I interrupted, "you and I have already been over this. I'm not part of your HOA. You don't have the authority to be concerned about anything on this land. Now I'm asking you nicely. Stop harassing me. Stop taking photos of my property. If you keep this up, I'll go straight to the authorities." Her smile vanished. "Are you threatening me?" she snapped. I shook my head. "Number, I'm setting a boundary. Respect it." She didn't respond, just put the SUV in gear and peeled off. I hoped that would be the end of it. But Karen wasn't the type to take a boundary as anything other than a dare. A few days later, I was working in the workshop, building a new chicken coop, when I heard the unmistakable rumble of engines outside. Not one, not two, but several. I stepped outside to find a crew of landscapers on my front lawn. Rakes, clippers, shovels. They were already at work like this was some public park project. One guy was measuring the lawn. Another was uprooting a shrub near my mailbox. "Hey!" I shouted, striding toward them. "What the hell do you think you're doing?" The foreman looked up, clipboard in hand, and said calmly, "We're from Green Line Landscaping. We were contracted by the HOA to bring this property into compliance with community standards." I felt my blood pressure spike. "What HOA?" I barked. "This property isn't in your community. I've told you all 100 times." The man blinked, genuinely confused. "We were told by a Mrs. Karen Johnson that the homeowner had agreed to it. We're just following the plan." That's when I heard her voice again, sweet as venom. "Oh, Mr. Reynolds," she called out, stepping out of her SUV with a smug smile. "I see you've noticed the improvements. Don't worry, we'll have this place looking proper in no time." I was done playing games. I marched straight toward her. "Karen, you sent a crew onto my property without permission. That's trespassing." She waved a hand like I was being dramatic. "No need to be so uptight. The HOA approved this. We're just helping you get in line with community expectations." "You're not my community," I growled. "You don't have any right to dictate what happens here." She smiled wider, like she was waiting for me to snap. "Actually, I do," she said. "I have documentation." She pulled out a folder from her bag and held it up like it was holy scripture. I grabbed it, flipped it open, and froze. What I saw made my stomach turn. Maps with fake parcel boundaries, forged signatures, made-up survey data. She had falsified documents to make it look like my property was within the limits of Pinewood Estates. This wasn't just harassment anymore. This was attempted fraud. "These are fake," I said, my voice low and sharp. "You forged property records." Her eyes glittered. "Prove it." That's when I pulled out my phone and started dialing. "Yes, I need to report an active trespass and attempted property fraud," I said, locking eyes with her. "Send officers immediately." For the first time since I'd met her, Karen looked rattled. Not just angry, scared. She turned to the landscapers. "Pack it up. We'll finish this another time." But I stepped in her path. "You're not going anywhere, Karen. Not until the police arrive. We're done playing games." And just like that, the war had escalated. She'd crossed a line that couldn't be uncrossed. It didn't take long for the officers to arrive. Within the hour, 2 patrol cars pulled up, followed by an unmarked vehicle. Officer David Parker stepped out again, his expression unreadable this time. But he wasn't alone. A plainclothes detective followed him, clipboard in hand, and eyes scanning the scene like he was already piecing everything together. Karen stood frozen near the SUV, trying to look composed, but her posture betrayed her. Arms tight across her chest, eyes darting between the crew and me like a cornered animal, trying to find an exit. The detective asked me for a rundown. I handed over the folder Karen had so proudly presented, detailing how the documents were forged and how she had misrepresented the property boundaries. I showed him copies of my official land survey, permits, deed records, everything I had meticulously kept over the years. The detective reviewed each item carefully, occasionally glancing at Karen, who was trying to maintain her innocent facade, but you could see the cracks forming. Her confidence had always been built on the assumption that no one would challenge her, that she could bully and bulldoze her way into getting what she wanted. But this time, she was up against hard evidence and a landowner who'd had enough. Meanwhile, the landscaping crew stood awkwardly to the side, clearly realizing they'd been dragged into something way above their pay grade. One of the workers even whispered to me, "We had no idea, sir." She said it was all legit. "We're just a hired crew." I believed them. I told them to hang tight and cooperate with the officers. They weren't the target here. Karen was. After a lengthy discussion, an officer walked over to her, handcuffs ready. "Ma'am, you're being placed under arrest for trespassing, attempted fraud, and filing false reports." The words hit her like a slap. She looked at me like I had somehow betrayed her, as if I was the one who had overstepped. As they led her to the patrol car, she shouted over her shoulder, still clinging to her fantasy of righteousness. "You think this is over? It's not over. I was trying to improve this place." But the echo of her protests was drowned out by the click of the car door closing behind her. You'd think that would be the end. I sure hoped it would be. But deep down, I knew better. Karen might have been in cuffs, but the war wasn't over. She'd infected her HOA with the same arrogance, the same overreach, and I knew they weren't going to just roll over quietly. The days that followed were a blur of legal paperwork and meetings. I met with attorneys, county officials, real estate experts. I wasn't just dealing with one power-tripping neighbor anymore. I was going up against an entire board that had either enabled her or turned a blind eye to her behavior. I hired Jennifer Martinez, a sharp-as-nails property rights attorney with a reputation for exposing HOA abuse. From the moment I walked into her office, she took my case seriously. "You're not the first person to deal with something like this," she told me. "But you might be the first one with enough documentation and community support to actually take it to court and win." And win was exactly what we set out to do. We weren't just filing charges against Karen as an individual. We were coming after the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association itself. Their board had allowed her to act in their name, enforce imaginary rules, and harass people beyond their legal boundaries. If they claimed she acted alone, we'd make them prove it. And if they knew and did nothing, that made them just as responsible. While we built our case, something unexpected happened. Word of what had happened started to spread, not just among the board, but among the residents of Pinewood Estates. At first I expected more hostility, more angry stares when I passed by. But that wasn't what happened. Instead, people started reaching out. Quietly at first. A note left in my mailbox. A knock at the door from someone I didn't know. They all had stories. Some small, some outrageous. One man told me he was fined nearly $1,000 for having the wrong kind of flower pot. A single mother said she'd been threatened with legal action because her kids' bikes were left out in the driveway too often. One elderly couple confided in me that Karen had hounded them weekly about their lawn, while the husband was in the middle of chemotherapy treatments. What had happened to me was outrageous, but it was also the tipping point. Karen had poked the wrong bear, and in doing so, she'd awakened a community that had been quietly suffering under her control for far too long. Jennifer started gathering testimonies, signed statements, photos, copies of letters and fines. The pile of evidence kept growing. And with every document, the case against both Karen and the HOA board got stronger. When the official civil case was filed, it sent shockwaves through the neighborhood. The HOA's lawyers tried to get it dismissed immediately. Their argument was that I wasn't a member of the association, so I had no standing. But Jennifer shut that down with a force that even I wasn't expecting. In court, she said, "Mr. Reynolds may not be a member, but he has been directly impacted by the HOA's overreach. He was harassed. His property was trespassed upon. Forged documents were submitted under the board's name. The association, through its president, attempted to exert unlawful control over land it had no authority over." The judge allowed the case to proceed. And once that happened, more residents came forward. People who had never said a word out of fear suddenly realized they weren't alone anymore. They had someone willing to stand up. Someone who wasn't afraid of the HOA's letters and legal threats. Witness after witness stepped forward, eager to testify. It wasn't just about me anymore. It had grown into something bigger, something that needed to happen. I'd started this fight defending my family's land. But now I was fighting for a community that had been bullied, fined, manipulated, and silenced. And for the first time, they had a voice that couldn't be ignored. The trial was a spectacle, and not just in the courtroom. Local reporters were circling like vultures, and soon, regional news outlets picked up the story. "Estate owner takes on HOA tyranny" was one headline I saw. People love a good David versus Goliath narrative, and that's exactly what this had become. The courtroom itself was packed almost every day. Some people came out of curiosity, others out of quiet support. You could feel the tension in the air, like everyone knew something bigger than one property dispute was being decided. We weren't just arguing about boundary lines or property maintenance. We were putting a spotlight on abuse of power, on the way a few people with a title and a clipboard can make life hell for an entire neighborhood. When I took the stand, I didn't sugarcoat anything. I told the jury everything. From that first encounter with Karen, to the forged documents, to the trespassing crew that showed up uninvited. I described the harassment, the fake notices, the invasion of privacy, the stress that built day by day until I had no choice but to fight back. But I didn't stop there. I talked about what I'd learned along the way. About the people in Pinewood Estates who'd been living under Karen's thumb for years. People fined for Christmas lights, for parking on their own driveways, for having too many guests over on the weekend. I spoke about the quiet fear, the whispered complaints, the sense of powerlessness they all shared. This case, I told the jury, wasn't just about me anymore. It was about the right to live in peace without someone weaponizing rules to control others. Karen sat across from me the whole time, her expensive lawyers whispering in her ear, her expression sour and stiff. She looked like someone who still believed, deep down, that she was the real victim in all of this. But as the testimonies piled up, you could see the confidence drain from her face. One by one, residents told their stories. An elderly widow explained how Karen had harassed her over excess garden decor. A father said his son was given a warning for drawing on the sidewalk with chalk. A local vet testified how Karen tried to stop him from running his home office, even though the bylaws allowed it. They told their stories with emotion, some with tears, some with long-held anger, finally let loose. The room was quiet except for their words. Jennifer called in expert witnesses too, legal professionals who explained the limitations of HOA authority, surveyors who confirmed that my property had never once been part of Pinewood Estates, and forensic analysts who verified that the documents Karen submitted were indeed forgeries. Every bit of it landed like a blow against the HOA's already crumbling defense. They tried to distance themselves from her, claimed they had no knowledge of her actions, said she acted independently. But email records, board minutes, and witness statements made it clear. Karen hadn't been a rogue agent. She was the HOA, and the board had let her run unchecked. After 2 long weeks of testimonies, arguments, and objections, the jury finally returned their verdict. I'll never forget the moment the foreman stood up and read it. They found in my favor on every count: trespassing, harassment, fraud, emotional distress. The damages awarded were substantial, not just to cover repairs and legal costs, but to make a statement. More than that, the judge ordered a full restructuring of the Pinewood Estates Homeowners Association. An independent auditor would take over, bylaws would be rewritten, and the current board, including Karen, obviously, was immediately removed. That was the part that hit hardest. It wasn't just a win for me, it was a reset button for the entire neighborhood. Afterward, as I walked out of the courthouse, I was swarmed by reporters and neighbors alike. People shook my hand. Some hugged me. One older gentleman simply tipped his hat and said, "Thank you for standing up to them. You didn't just save your land, you saved our lives." I didn't know what to say. I was exhausted, emotionally and mentally drained, but hearing that made it all feel worth it. I hadn't set out to become a symbol of anything. I just wanted to protect what was mine. But somehow, I had become the person who stood up when no one else could. The weeks that followed were a whirlwind. The HOA overhaul moved fast. With the auditor in place, Karen and the rest of her allies were ousted. A call went out for new volunteers, and surprisingly, many of the very people Karen had once bullied stepped up to lead. People who had been silent, afraid, or pushed into the background were now part of the solution. They formed an interim board focused on rebuilding trust and transparency. They eliminated pointless fines, replaced aggressive enforcement with community service initiatives, and created open forums where residents could actually speak without fear. Then something happened I didn't expect. I got a visit. It was Brian, one of the Pinewood Estates residents who'd testified during the trial. He came to my front gate, smiling and holding a flyer. "Hey Michael," he said. "I hope you don't mind the drop-in. We're holding our first official meeting under the new board this weekend. And, well, we were hoping you might come." I must have looked surprised, because he quickly added, "Not as a member. We know you're not part of the HOA, but as a neighbor, and the guy who made all of this possible, we'd be honored if you said a few words." I wasn't sure what to expect, but I showed up, walked into their community center, and saw the same faces that had once looked at me with suspicion or indifference. Now they were smiling, welcoming. The room was buzzing with conversation, laughter, even kids running around. The vibe was different, not tense, not controlling, just human. When Brian introduced me, people stood and clapped. I've given speeches before, but that one caught in my throat. "I know I'm not technically part of Pinewood Estates," I said, But over these last few months, I've come to care about this community. What you went through, what we all stood up against. It wasn't just about rules. It was about power, control, and the courage it takes to push back. You found your voice, and I'm proud to have stood beside you. I wasn't exaggerating. What I witnessed that day was the start of something real, something hopeful. They had gone from living under a regime of fear to building a community where people looked out for one another. And oddly enough, I no longer felt like the guy on the outside of the fence. I was their neighbor, their friend, maybe even a quiet hero in their eyes. That summer, I hosted a 4th of July barbecue on my land. Open invite to the entire neighborhood. People brought chairs, kids chased each other through the fields, and for the first time in years, the property felt truly alive. The boundary lines didn't matter anymore, not in the way they used to. There was a kind of unspoken agreement now, mutual respect, shared space, a better understanding of what a neighborhood could be. And just when I thought the last chapter had been written, another twist walked right up my driveway. It was Karen. She looked different, smaller somehow. Not physically, but in presence. She stood at the edge of my lawn, hesitant. For a second I considered turning away, but then I noticed the look in her eyes. Humble, uncertain, not the arrogance I was used to. "Mr. Reynolds," she said, "I owe you an apology." I didn't say anything, just waited. What I did to you, to everyone, it wasn't right. I let power go to my head. I thought I was protecting something, but I was really just trying to control it. She paused, swallowed hard. I know it doesn't fix anything, but I wanted to say I'm sorry. Truly. I believed her. For the first time I saw a human being instead of a tyrant. I nodded slowly. "Thank you, Karen. That means more than you know." She turned to leave, but I called after her. "Barbecue's next week. You're welcome to come if you want." She turned, startled, and for the first time ever, smiled in a way that felt real. "I'd like that. Thank you." As I stood there watching her walk away, it hit me. What started as a conflict had become a transformation, not just of land or law, but of people, of community, of understanding. And as the sun set across those 50 acres my great-grandfather once tamed, I realized something powerful. Sometimes the strongest fences don't protect us. They isolate us. But when you tear down the right ones, what you build in their place might just bring people together in a way rules and regulations never could.